Go, baby. Let's go.
Yes. Let's go.
So Isaiah Land out of Florida State was one of the nearly 20 HBCU, Florida A&M, I beg your pardon. Oh, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. Florida A&M.
Ooh.
Florida, yeah. Isaiah Land out of Florida A&M was one of the nearly 20 HBCU players signed as undrafted free agents, more than last year. But Jackson State's Isaiah Bolden was the only HBCU player drafted who heard his name called, didn't get the phone call about being an undrafted free agent, but heard his actual name called in the 2023 draft, down from 4 last year. So it feels like we're having an annual conversation, Jim Trotter of The Athletic, nice to see you, about the NFL shunning HBCU players, despite players like Detroit's James Houston, for example, making an immediate impact as a rookie last year. Doug Williams said he was surprised. Deion Sanders, okay, for whatever it's worth, said he was ashamed.
Man. Look, I'm glad he did, though. I'm glad he did.
Okay, that's nice.
I'm glad Deion.
Not to get sidetracked, Deion has already said that their ice is colder. But okay, Deion, thanks. Appreciate you chiming in. Okay.
Woo.
So Deion said that he was ashamed.
Already.
Bottom line, Jim, what is going on here? There's a HBCU combine. There's a legacy bowl, okay? People like you and Steve Weish at your old place, NFL Media, doing so much to continue to shine a spotlight on these prospects and these players. The NFL is known for looking at every nook and cranny at home and abroad for talent. But one player good enough to get drafted, quote unquote? What's going on here, man?
Yeah, fellas, there's a lot to unpack here. First off, full disclosure, being unemployed until next week, I think I only watched the first 12 picks of this draft and did not watch another moment of it thereafter. So, and that was refreshing for me because it had been how many decades that I had participated in this draft process. But when I saw the story about only one HBCU player being drafted, I cut short my unofficial vacation and started making a few calls. And so this morning I talked to at least 5 GMs and a couple of HBCU head coaches. And the reality here, guys, if you take the emotion out of it, is that there are a lot of layers to this story. Number one, what I wanted to do is try and compare apples to apples. So we know that HBCUs play at the football championship subdivision, which was previously known as 1AA football. So there are 125 schools that play at football at that level. What I wanted to know was how many players total at that level were drafted, not just HBCU, but total. And what I came up with is that there were 10 total at that level who were drafted, only one being from an HBCU. The year before, there were 20 total from that level, 4 of whom, as you said, were from HBCUs. And the year before that, in 2021, there were 5 total players from that level, none of whom were from HBCUs. So what that means is that players from the FCS division or level aren't being drafted very often in the NFL today. Teams are looking for players from the Power Five conferences and schools. And so as one GM said to me today, you've got MVPs from Power Five schools and whatnot who weren't drafted. There is no bias against HBCUs. Here's the other thing that's going on, guys. And again, being an HBCU alum, I want to bring the heat and say, man, these teams are discriminating against these schools and whatnot. But it's hard to when you look at the numbers. Here's what I'm talking about from that standpoint. So the transfer portal and NIL has made this extremely difficult for players at smaller schools to get drafted from those schools. Why do I say that? Because what's happening now when you talk to GMs and you talk to college coaches, Power 5 schools are now using the smaller division schools as feeder programs to their programs. You guys there? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, yeah, I heard you.
You there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's happening is these Power 5 schools are now recruiting, so to speak, from these smaller conference schools. And so players aren't hanging around there. So in other words, if you see a player at a small college school who shows he can play at that level, the Power 5 schools are coming in and saying, hey, hit the transfer portal. Here's NIL money that's waiting for you and whatnot. Come on up. So some players who would typically be at an HBCU aren't there anymore. And Deion just did this himself.
Last year? Who am I thinking about?
No, look at Deion. I know, but look at Deion this year. Deion took 3 of the top players from the Jackson State program with him to Colorado.
Right. Yeah. But there was a guy from Jackson State, and I don't think it was Houston, maybe it was, who was drafted last year, and the team put out the highlights from it might have been Houston. They put out the highlights from the Power 5 school that he was at before he went to Jackson State. Am I getting that right?
Right.
So I hear what you're saying, that they're indirectly still coming from HBCUs, but they're going to Power 5 schools through this feeder system. I hear you.
Go ahead.
Here's what used to happen, as you guys know. Let's say a player went to a Power 5 school and decided that either he wasn't playing or he wasn't happy or whatnot. And this is prior to the transfer portal. So rather than going to another Power 5 school where he would have to sit out for a year, he might go down to the 1AA level and some HBCUs where he could play right away. Well, now that's kind of being reversed, where what we're seeing now is if you go, those players who go to these small division schools, if they go in, they play and they play well, again, Power 5 schools are coming in and saying, hit the transfer portal. Come on up with us. We got NIL money. You're going to play on a larger stage. Teams are going to see you. And that's where NFL clubs are going right now. Because, look, you guys know this, having covered the NFL. As one GM said to me today, we'll go to China if we can find a player who can play for us. That's the reality of what it is. They said the talent just wasn't there this year.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, are they saying that it doesn't transfer? Because, based on the numbers that you use, so 20, 4 out of 20. So you found some. You
1
found
out of
some
10
guys
this year.
there. You dropped from 20%. If my math is right, you dropped from 20% to 10%. 1 out of 10 from 4 out of 20 to 1 out of 10. Are they saying it's hard? It's hard to identify those players. It's hard to translate what they will be from 1AA, the old school 1AA, to the pros. Are they not looking hard enough? What's the issue?
Here's the other problem, as was outlined to me by one GM. And he was being transparent. He was being honest about this. He said, if the 2 scouting services don't include a player's name, they're not going to that school. Talking about small colleges, programs. They said, we will send 3 scouts to Ohio State every year, regardless of whether or not they have players' names on the list or not. We're going to have 3 scouts going through that school every year. If a player from a small division school is not on that list, he said, we're not sending a scout there. So what does that mean? As one agent said to me this morning, again, talking about this, it is incumbent on the pro liaison at HBCUs and the 1AA level to contact these scouting services and say, our guy's name needs to be on that list, so therefore we can have a scout coming through. Now, that might sound lazy on the team's part, and I'm not going to argue whether that's right or wrong. I'm just telling you what they're telling me in terms of how they approach this.
Just reporting.
Yes.
No, we appreciate the as always, thorough and specific reporting. I guess the only slight pushback, and I could be wrong on this, is it feels like, as I started off by saying this annual conversation, it feels like we were having this before the era of NIL and a transfer portal. It feels like this is not specific to 2023, because even in 2022, 4 is not a lot. I think the year before that it was 2, and it was only a couple of years ago it was 0. So it's not necessarily a new problem, but it sounds like Is it an unsolvable problem? I mean, what more? Because it was obviously embarrassing and shameful, but is it one of those things where, am I hearing you right, Jim, where it kind of is what it is? Or can the league do more? Can the teams do more beyond attending an HBCU combine and a Legacy Bowl and decide? And I guess the hang up that people have, Jim, is if all these dudes are good enough to be undrafted priority free agents in a lot of cases, undrafted free agents, were they not good enough to hear their name called? I guess it's that distinction that's tripping people up. It's like they can get an opportunity, but it's not gonna be by way of the draft. Right. I mean, that was a lot there, but help me unpack that.
Right. No. Go back to like 2019 and 2018. In 2019, there were 4 players from HBCUs drafted. In 2018, there were 3. And then all of a sudden we got to 2021 and 2022. And with COVID. 2021, we had the pandemic, right? So we had none. Yep. Then all of a sudden we had 4 and then we had 1. And look, this is not something that the league can control. They created an HBCU combine. They also created an HBCU All-Star game. So to talk about exposure being the problem here, that's not the problem anymore. The problem really is when you talk to GMs, they have what they call standards. Some might say they are biases in terms of what they look for in players. And they have specific measurables that they like in players. For instance, when they go down this list from Bledsoe or the other scouting service, they will look at height, weight, speed. If you don't hit the benchmarks that they look for, they automatically rule you out. Like they're not interested in following you. So if you're at a smaller school, already they've taken you out of the equation because you don't meet the standard that they want from players at certain positions in terms of height, weight, speed.
Check this out. Speaking of standard, I'm going to just say this, Michael, I know you feel me on this. This is why I F's with Jim Trotter. If anybody had reason to come in here today and give the NFL smoke, it was Jim Trotter. But as usual, my man's like, nah, I'm a reporter, I'm a journalist. Here are the facts. This is the information. Do with it what you will. I'm a reporter.
MVP.
Ain't nothing changing that. Love it.
Hey, thank you for watching Brother from Another. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, go ahead and do that now. Don't forget you can catch us 3 to 4 weekdays on PeacockTV.com and on Sirius XM Channel 85.